Welcome to the panel on mental health in the workplace. In LifeWork's recent 2022 Mental Health in the Workplace report, it was identified that since April 2020, the mental health of Canadians has been 10 points or lower than the pre-pandemic benchmark. The report also found that more than 2 in 5 Canadians end their workday feeling mentally and or physically exhausted, and more than 1/4 of Canadians cannot disconnect from work after usual work hours. At the same time, students and grads report that support for mental health in the workplace is an important driver of their decision about where they want to start their careers. In this panel, we'll discuss important mental health initiatives you can explore for your workplace and strategies for supporting your team, as well as highlighting your safe and supportive workplace culture as part of your employer brand. Joining me to discuss these important issues are Manami Algayer, Senior Manager, Talent Acquisition at Bell Canada, Dr. Stephanie Bott, Chief Psychologist at Dr. Stephanie Bott and Associates and co-founder of WorkRight, and Chelsea Hill, Human Resources Generalist for Valet. Welcome, everyone. Everyone has experienced some kind of mental health challenges during the past 2 years, ranging from anxiety, loneliness, stress, and even grief. Our workplaces changed dramatically during the pandemic, and it's been hard for many employees and employers to adjust. Can you each provide your perspective on the unique mental health challenges that your teams may have experienced during the pandemic years? Manami, maybe we could start with you.
Absolutely. First of all, Mary, thank you for inviting me to speak on this panel on behalf of Bell. Really pleased to be able to be here to speak on this important topic today. I think as far as kind of our team's unique experience, we have a lot of experts on this team. We're natural networkers. It's a core part of what our work is campus recruiters. And so, yes, we definitely had that experience of loneliness and kind of isolation during the pandemic, as many of our colleagues and other teams did too. And then there was also that very direct impact on the core of our work, not being able to see and meet hundreds of new students every week on campus. So I think on that kind of day-to-day side, there was definitely that aspect of making a more conscious effort to carve out time for each other in meetings, setting aside work lunches or a little bit of time at the beginning of a call just to connect and check in on each other instead of dumping straight to the agenda, which we know is so tempting when it's a virtual meeting. And then on the kind of, our strategy side of what our work is, we had to adjust how we meet with students, and definitely virtual events went a long way in helping us to still meet with the large volumes we're used to. But I also found that we got a different kind of experience. I got more time one-on-one with students than I ever would have if we've been in person. Where, in a traditional networking event, you've got, 6 to 8 students gathered in a circle, and there's always that person kind of on the edge of the circle or a row back. And now I had the chance to actually meet those people and hear their stories. So as far as that unique experience for us, I think it was, just adjusting the way that we connect with people and finding new ways to make those connections.
And Chelsea, what did you find?
Yeah, I think for us at Valet, I think the feelings of loneliness and stress and anxiety, or however people were feeling, were common. I don't think it was something unique to just Valet. But I think prior to the pandemic, we kept our work and personal life very separate. And being at home, now I'm invited into the homes of my coworkers during every virtual meeting. So for someone like myself, I live by myself, so I found the pandemic quite isolating. But then I have coworkers who had to manage having kids at home 100% of the time. So maybe the feelings that we experienced during the pandemic were different, but we had the same or amount of challenges, I guess, that we faced. And we were able to sort of support each other through that, whether we had kids at home or we were just trying to manage ourselves.
And Stephanie, what did you see in your practice? What kind of experiences did your patients actually address with you in related to their mental health in the workplace?
One of the areas that I saw the greatest and most painful escalation to observe was for mothers that also worked full-time and had their kids at home off school at the same time, and trying to navigate even creating the privacy to have a session to deal with the stress that they were having was a difficulty in and of itself. And but really, I could echo what Chelsea and Manami were saying, the isolation, the stress and anxiety of having to just really also pivot really quickly to just address these changes. Now we're online, now the children are here, now the dog is barking while I'm trying to have a meeting, all of those things that are just so, they're like extra stressors on top of what's usually very stressful to begin with. So that's what I observed, was extra stress in already stressful lives.
Well, we're talking a lot about the recruitment of young people straight out of university or college. And do you think there's any unique sort of mental health challenges that may apply to them due to their youth or relative inexperience in the workplace? Stephanie, what are your thoughts there?
I think there probably is. And I have a few patients that were going through those transitions from, one person I'm thinking of, she was graduating nursing. Now that still had its in-person element, but all her schooling ended up happening online. And so she had this interesting experience of not having the benefit of having the classmates present with her to talk about the stressors of their practicums in the hospitals and things like that. So I think that there was a loss of community that helped people build resilience to their new experiences and to, get inside information from each other so that they felt bolstered up from one another to be more effective and learn from each other. And I think that was a big loss from the isolation.
And Manami, I wonder, did you actually observe this, in terms of the kinds of students and grads that you had relationships with or met during the pandemic years? Did you find that they were more vulnerable in unique ways than perhaps students that you'd met previously?
We did. And I think having that compassion and empathy for their situation was really important, even more so. I think it always is for students. It's a really big chapter of life that they're closing and moving out of when they come to the workforce. But I think especially for this most recent cohort, they face some really unique challenges. It's, Dr. Bada really liked your choice of resilience. I think that's such an accurate word choice here, that there are things that they would have experienced that they didn't get to, and now they're going into the workforce without those experiences. But major milestones oftentimes too, right? Like moving away from family for the first time, walking across that graduation stage. And so yes, we definitely had to practice a little more empathy and recognize that these are people that are navigating something that's new, not only to them, but new to everybody else. There isn't a person they can turn to and say, how do you do this when it's all virtual? They're really having to figure it out for the first time. And as much as we talked about what that experience is for the students while it was happening, we also talked about what this is going to mean for them later down the line too. And we're starting to see those impacts now. We're slowly easing back into some hybrid in-person virtual events. And at our first one, we kind of did the same setup we used to do, which is give them some icebreaker cards and some food, and they'll figure it out. They'll have a good time. And they did. But we also got feedback they wanted a little bit more. They weren't quite sure how to break away from the names and faces they'd seen on Zoom calls and meet the new people they hadn't seen before. And so we realized that this is a cohort that's going to need a little extra support and resources as we get back into in-person, of how to navigate meeting somebody in person for the first time and really putting yourself out of your comfort zone. So for some of our upcoming events, we've kind of changed the approach to do I won't say a sign that sounds kind of formal, but we help to mix the groups a little bit more together in the activity, and then have a space later when they can mingle on their own. But it really helped to break down some of those barriers and get people comfortable meeting new folks.
And Chelsea, did you experience similar sort of behaviors or concerns among some of the young talent you might have had contact with that were distinctly unique because of their youth?
Yeah, I think some of the points that have already been mentioned are sort of spot on, but I think what I'd like to add is when we went through the pandemic, we were working from home and the use of social media increased. People were using TikTok and Instagram and even LinkedIn more often than prior to the pandemic. And when you look at those social media platforms, it really is a highlight reel of everyone's accomplishments. It's not showing that people are struggling with moving away from home or they're nervous about starting a new job. So we're lacking that connection and ability to normalize the idea that it's okay to be scared and it's okay to be sad or angry or however we may feel when we're starting a new job. So I know, and even myself, when I graduated, I put so much pressure on myself to figure out what I wanted to do and what my career was going to look like and where I was going to work, where looking back, that pressure didn't help me succeed any more than I already have. So just thinking about those new grads and the students, just if they can take some pressure off themselves and realize that social media is not telling the whole story and that they're just going to be fine, I think that could help them a lot moving forward.
That is really insightful and an important point. This juxtaposition, this conflict between what's seen on social media and these perfect lives and how people really feel. And I think for young people, it's hard for them to recognize the reality behind the kind of show that is being put on in many cases in social media. I'm curious whether your companies undertook outreach to the employees to discover whether they might be suffering from some sort of mental problems or emotional problems as a consequence of this long period of isolation and some of the virtual work that we did. And if you could perhaps describe the kind of outreach that was done, if you did do it, and what the findings were. Manami, could you help us with that?
I start out with maybe one example of the ways we did this. So we did reach out for employee input throughout the pandemic about how are they feeling really. Like there was a Likert scale we could share. This week in particular, how did we feel? Were we feeling good? Were we feeling a little down? And I really got the sense from these questions that they were different to the standard employee survey, that our employer really did want to hear how we were doing keeping up with things. And one of the results of some of these surveys is our new workplace program. So this is a program that helps guide employees through what the best work format is for them and for the type of work that they're doing. So we have those folks that are a full-time in-office profile. We have the folks that are completely remote. And then we have people that are mobile, which is where a lot of our new grads and interns sit. And it really helps them during the interview and hiring process to know what to expect when they begin and to know that there's going to be that flexibility to find what works best for them, whether it's 1 day in the office, 2, 3, 4, 5 for some who really want to be there all the time. And that chance to be able to get that social interaction while also having the option to work from home on days that make sense, or days where they may need it. And I know I've personally taken advantage of that. I had a day a couple of weeks ago where we were all going to come to the office together and do like a spring clean of our old desks. And I was kind of looking forward to it. And the day came and I realized I was not in the right state to be trying to put on fronts and smiles and interact with people. I needed a day at home with my video camera off. And I was really thankful to have that flexibility to be able to do that, because I still felt productive and ready to come to work, just wasn't quite ready to show up in an in-person kind of way. And so this flexible profile is one of the ways that we're able to support employees through that.
And Chelsea, did your company actually do some outreach, and what were the findings?
Yeah, so at Valley, we actually have a mental health committee that was started back in 2013, and it has Valley employees, but also representatives from our 2 unions in Sudbury. So it gives us a lot of diverse perspective. And the reason I mentioned we started it in 2013 is because mental health problems have been extremely common in the mining industry way before the pandemic. So we have done outreach throughout the 3 years of working from home, but we already knew from our previous outreach that mental health problems exist. So Valley focused a lot on optimizing our support services in the recovery. So making sure that we had resources available. We introduced new resources like TELUS Health so that employees could connect to resources remotely. And we held mental health training all throughout the year. So yes, we did see an increase in mental health problems, but I think because of all of the effort this committee has done prior, we tried to be a bit more proactive, knowing that our employees will need support regardless of sort of those findings that come out of the outreach.
Well, Stephanie, perhaps you could tell us what employers could do to help support their staff to deal with these multiple mental health issues, because they're clearly not just going to disappear overnight simply because we have greater freedoms now. That certainly there is this discussion about how after the pandemic there's going to be a pandemic of mental health issues among Canadians. Could you give us some advice from an employer's perspective what they can do?
Sure. So first of all, I just want to say I'm really impressed with what I'm hearing from my colleagues on this panel. I'm really impressed with what both of these organizations are doing to support their employees and the people they're looking at recruiting and whatnot. I think it's really that in itself, just to know that there are initiatives creates a foundation for letting people know that they're being supported. And I think one of the things that's important that I see both consulting with workplaces and also in my practice is that people don't actually know what resources are available to them. So when their mental health issues are arising, first of all, they still feel like there's something terribly wrong with them and that it's not normal. So I feel like the destigmatizing and the building mental health awareness programs are really, really important so people know that they are not alone, that this is not a failure. This is, I always say, and it's not my quote, obviously, I forget who said it, but an unusual reaction to an unusual situation is normal. And so we have to be able to remind people that what we've all been through has been traumatic. And I was thinking about that as I was preparing for this panel, because we used to be called in to deal with critical incidents in the workplace. Well, this was a critical incident for every workplace, and it was ongoing, it was chronic. So when you look at an incident on people's mental health, we often think of like an isolated incident, like, a bomb scare happened in a workplace or something like that's just like an isolated incident. This was ongoing. And so if people were doing okay for a little while, it just kept eroding. And so those supports, community events, having a sense of connection, to me, is the most healing thing. Any ways that workplaces can work hard on building those things, not as specifically necessarily a mental health resource, but just recognizing that the isolation and the extension of the workday has interrupted people's opportunity to be with themselves, to do their own thing, to feel themselves outside of work, and to have a sense of work not only being work, but also a community and a place for connection is something that's really going to buffer mental health issues.
Well, thanks, Stephanie. I also like to understand from an employer's perspective, what employers can do to support their managers to identify potential mental health issues among the teams that they lead to better develop workplace wellness. Manami, perhaps you could tell us what Bell's been doing?
Absolutely. This is such a good question. I think it's really important to note there are lots of different ways that employers can really accomplish this. One of the many things that we do at Bell is actually employer training for all of our people leaders. It's specifically around mental health leadership in the workplace and how we actively create a space where employees can share if they're not feeling themselves and if they need the extra support. I've gone through 2 of the 3 modules for that. I'm working through it right now, and already I've learned quite a lot. One of the things that I think stood out to me was how do we actually create that conversation? It's you may be observing something in an employee, but we also have to be respectful of that's their private health. They may or may not feel ready to share that or want to disclose that to somebody at work. So kind of creating that space in one-on-one settings where we can say, hey, I've observed that your work's a little different than usual. Are you feeling okay? Is there something that I can do to support you? It creates that space where there's an openness to be able to share, but there's also the opportunity if they want to keep it to themselves. And we're not pressing people or forcing people into spaces that are uncomfortable for them. So I think, training like that is really helpful for people leaders because it like I said, it really reinforces those values and allows us to live them in front of our employees. And that's just one example of ways that we can do it. There's other things too. I think mental health, it's really something that we all play a role in. And so it's not just people leaders that are part of that conversation, it's every individual. And for us, that often takes the form of different workshops, webinars, activities that we do live or asynchronous throughout the year. Not just during specific, themed weeks that we have, but also just throughout the calendar year too.
And Chelsea, perhaps you could tell us, what does Ballet do around helping managers identify issues and perhaps being better prepared to respond to the needs of the teams that they lead?
Yeah, so I recently actually had the opportunity to lead mental health training for all of our employees, including managers in the GTA. This training has been rolled out across Canada to make sure everyone has a chance to be part of the conversation. But when it comes specifically to managers, the number one thing that I like to tell them or remind them is they are not a doctor, they are not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. It is not their role to diagnose or fix a mental health problem. Their role is really to support, help combat the stigma, and make sure those support resources are available. So throughout this training, we talk about what mental health problems are, the barriers to mental well-being, and then focus on really how they can help. So what are some of the signs and symptoms of an employee who could be experiencing a mental health problem, and how you can help normalize what they're going through and support them and intervene and get them the support. So it's really getting them comfortable in those conversations to talk about mental health. And one of my personal goals in that training is to have managers feel comfortable to talk about mental health as they would feel comfortable talking about physical health. So just like if an employee came to them with a broken arm, they need to recognize that an employee with a mental health problem may need a bit more rest. Their capacity at work may look a little bit different as they're going through their recovery, and that they shouldn't anticipate for that employee to feel better overnight. Just like if an employee broke their arm wouldn't be better if they woke up the next day after seeing a doctor. So it's just really trying to keep in mind what mental health problems are and how common they are, and being more comfortable with the conversation.
I love that that description of the role of the leader, not being somebody who can diagnose illness or even cure it, but being there and present and supportive and understanding the challenges really is so critical. Full disclosure for our audience, TalentEgg has teamed up with Dr. Stephanie Bott and her team at WorkRight to offer a 10-course mental health and psychological safety in the workplace master certificate program as part of our new e-learning academy. So we have a sneak peek at the first course in that program. Let's take a look now.
Welcome to WorkRight's certificate program in the management of mental health and psychological safety at work, a 10-part series. This program was developed by psychologist Dr. Stephanie Bott and myself, Donna Marshall, MA Counseling Psychology. I write, lecture, present, and consult to both individuals and workplaces for over 20 years on issues and best practices for building and maintaining workplace mental health and psychological safety. I'm also a counselor in private practice. The first course in this series provides you with an introduction to mental health and psychological safety at work. I want to welcome you. Why the WorkRight Mental Health Certificate Program? Let me tell you about the WorkRight difference. We combine clinical expertise and corporate know-how to bring you what the Ontario Psychological Association refers to us as the gold standard provider of mental health and psychological safety for workplaces around the world. Today we're inundated with what I would call mass market mental health. Mental health is a complex clinical issue and one that runs the danger of being popularized, dumbed down by quick fix advice, and information that is not always evidence-based or clinically informed, and too frequently delivered by those without earned degrees or experience in mental health and psychology. There is a mental health crisis happening in work environments today, and that places a significant burden on the employer to be both properly informed and address clinical issues that they are not always prepared or trained to deal with. We designed this program for this exact reason. I want to give you some examples of some things I've heard people tell me about mental health initiatives in their workplaces. Unfortunately, these kinds of statements are not uncommon. See if you can spot the problems. First, I heard, "I'm getting up to speed on mental health." Do you ever hear people say, "I'm getting up to speed on engineering," or "I'm getting up to speed on law"? No. But for some reason, people assume mental health and mental illness are easy to get up to speed on, and this is not true. Another one is, "I don't diagnose, but I do say, this employee is behaving in a way consistent with obsessive-compulsive disorder." This is dangerous. Unless you are a licensed medical doctor, psychologist, or psychiatrist, you cannot communicate any information that sounds like a diagnosis, nor can you share confidential medical information. These kinds of quasi-diagnoses can cause damage to the individual, their reputation, and unfortunately stigmatize them. One other thing I heard was, I took that one-day course on mental health. It was great. I now pretty much know all I need to know in order to deal with it in our workplace. Even those with years of experience sometimes struggle to know how to address mental health issues when they appear in a work environment. The WorkRight Certificate Program. The information you'll receive in this certificate series is developed by highly qualified psychologists and mental health professionals. You will learn clinical information presented in a user-friendly manner and receive research-informed supportive scripts and advice based on research and practical experience. WorkRight brings together over 20 years of clinical expertise combined with extensive corporate experience, providing you with the highest level of workplace-related mental health certification. That's what makes us different. We know you'll enjoy this unique approach to understanding mental health and psychological safety in the workplace.
Stephanie, perhaps you can give us an overview of the courses making up the Master Certificate Program.
So the program is developed to sort of as building blocks. So we start with bringing the organization into making a strong building of awareness, so that a lot of times there's many nuances around how mental health issues show up. And, you know, Chelsea was talking about identifying those mental health issues. So in building awareness, we explain all the symptoms, subtle and not so subtle, to take notice of. And then we build on top of that to talk about assessing risks and vulnerabilities. Because a lot of times I'll speak with workplaces and they'll say, oh, we think we're doing okay. We know that some people have stress from the pandemic, but we think that we're okay. And then if they roll out a survey like Manami was talking about, or they do other things to get a broader perspective, they're often shocked to find out what's actually going on in the organization. So in our second module, after Module 1 talks about building awareness, the second module talks about how to find out about what your workplace's unique vulnerabilities are to mental health issues and how to assess them, and different survey options and things like that. All of our sections include downloadable workbooks and different resources to help support whatever the initiative is of that section. And then we enter into prevention. We like to talk about what the workplace can do to actually build resilience. We like to try and prevent the issue before it arises. And one of the things that Chelsea raised that I think is really important is she talked about, you can't expect the mental health issue to just go away, like we've identified it, but now you're not going to wake up just like a broken arm. It's still going to be there. And what's important that we address, both in the understanding how to prevent and also how to respond, is we look at the aspect of thinking about, you know, just because the workplace has an agenda that needs to get done next week doesn't mean the person's actually going to be able to see it through. And you can't overlook the mental health issue because you have a deadline. And I've seen this time and time again as an example of a mistake that we help employers figure out how to deal with in the program, is recognizing there are limits. And just because the workplace has an agenda doesn't mean we can bypass those limits, because that is when you will see your worker go off on stress leave. And when your worker goes off on stress leave, you have a much more expensive problem than probably not meeting your deadline. So we try and not just look at that, obviously, from the cost benefits, but also from creating, and this is part of what we deal with in this mental health program, is an engaged workplace, a workplace where everybody has a sense of belonging and has a sense that they feel supported. So part of the prevention are different tools and resources you can put in place to build that culture of mental health and resilience, which is really important. And then we also talk about, and this is not something people were talking about as much during the pandemic as they were before, but we talk about bullying and harassment in the workplace as a big part of prevention, because what's happening in particular now is that's also on the rise, because when mental health declines, our abilities to self-regulate and manage our tempers and all of our emotions is on the low. So in order to keep managers and leaders also feeling supported, we need processes and procedures in place to make sure that we're building a respectful workplace. And that is fundamental. I always say people typically do not leave work because they are unhappy at home or having stress at home. They take time off work because they're having stress at work. And that's really important for employers to pay attention to. And that's part of what the program addresses, is really zeroing in on your workplace and figuring out how to prevent, manage, and respond to mental health issues in the workplace. And the last thing I'm going to say about that, also following up on what some of my colleagues here said, is the identifying an intervention and also return to work. Like we provide how to do healthy accommodations to the workplace as part of the response, which I would say is one of the most challenging things, because when the insurers get involved, it creates a whole other layer of complication in terms of what will actually be paid for in terms of staying on long-term disability or whatnot, and how to do a gradual and appropriate return to work. And I think one of the things that I would encourage employers to do is to be talking to their insurers on how they can work together collaboratively to navigate healthier return to work programs. And we have a very solid, as part of this program, support for how to provide healthy and supported gradual return to works that are driven by the employee, not by the standards and expectations of insurers or the workplace.
Thank you, Stephanie. I think that's such a thorough sort of discussion about the contents of the course, and I really appreciate the fact that the course really focuses on the leaders or the managers, and gives them some sort of structure to allow them to understand what to do when an employee reaches out and explains that they're suffering from some sort of mental illness, or they're having feelings of anxiety. And so that sort of structure, that support is so critical, because they're, of course, maybe the only person that they reach out to about these problems. So I really appreciate you sort of giving this outline and looking at it from that holistic perspective. I also wanted to know that we do know that young job seekers, for them, now, an employer's mental health workplace program and wellness initiatives are actually very compelling for them to help them decide on the employers of choice in order to start their careers. I'm curious, Chelsea, how your company has integrated its mental health policies and programs into the employer value proposition as part of the employer brand when you're trying to recruit young people.
Yeah, so what I can share here is at Valley, we always say that people need to be at the center of all of our decisions. So it's not always about how much money we're making or what we're doing in sales or business. It's the people that matter first, because they're going to drive the success of our workplace. So by putting people at the center, we then make their physical and mental health a priority for all of our initiatives. And we really value safety at Valley. Mining can be extremely dangerous at times. So we want to make sure that our employees come to work and go home safely. Or if they're at home, working from home, we just want them to make sure that they're safe all throughout. So really, when it comes to integrating mental health into our employee value proposition, it's because we're putting people at the center that I think it makes a big difference. And one of the ways, and there's many ways at Valley in which we show it, is we actually have designated October as Mental Health Awareness Month. So we celebrate mental health in May, along with the rest of the world, but then we have similar conversations again in October to really bring light to mental health and share success stories and have people talk about mental health. So it's not just like a birthday that you celebrate once a year. We celebrate mental health twice a year and really keep the conversations going.
And Manami, we know, of course, Bell's rather extremely well-known campaign in Canada, but perhaps you could talk more precisely how your internal operations around supporting mental health in the workplace can be integrated into your employer value proposition.
Absolutely, yeah. Bell Let's Talk is definitely something that we're super proud of within Bell, and to be a part of a company that really does put mental health at the front is it makes me proud, really. And when we ask students about why they're interested in Bell, that dreaded 2-word interview question, why Bell, why us? Bell Let's Talk is one of the first things that I hear from students, and oftentimes they'll share a personal experience of why this is so important to them. And I think internally it's become a big part of our culture as well. I've mentioned a couple of things already, different themed weeks and workshops and webinars we're doing, training for our people leaders as well. But really integrating this, I think, into our culture has been a big part of making it our employer brand as well. Another great thing I'd love to share, and it's a huge win from our mental health team within HR, but also a win for everyone who works here, is that our mental health benefits recently changed to be unlimited, which is fantastic and really goes a long way in making mental health care and resources more accessible for everybody who works at Bell and for their family members as well.
Well, I wanted to end on a positive note and ask you that, really, even during the painful and challenging past 2.5 years, whether there has been any potential changes or lessons that we've learned as a result of the pandemic that could be viewed as positive for the sector as it relates to mental health. What are your thoughts about that? Let's start with you, Chelsea.
Yeah, so I wish that the pandemic didn't cause more sort of mental health problems for us to talk about, but I think that because mental health problems were on a rise, we were forced to talk about it, and we were forced to sort of look at what problems we were facing. And one of the things that I've learned is that vulnerability really does build connection. So by sharing our struggles and by sharing our challenges, we're able to connect more deeply with the people that we're working with. And it's not just coworker to coworker. These people really become friends and family who can support you through whatever you're going through. So in many ways, the pandemic, I think, brought everyone closer, and it made them a bit more comfortable when it comes to talking about mental health.
Right, and perhaps even brought a bit more empathy into how we have expectations around our colleagues and friends in the workplace. Stephanie, what are your thoughts around this?
I would definitely echo what Chelsea said, as well as I think that people also expanded their sense of gratitude because we became much more appreciative of things that we took for granted, like being able to see friends and family, being able to go into work and laugh together and share experiences. And so I think gratitude is actually a very positive quality. And I think now, as people are revisiting their lives in a different way, things that were taken for granted are now celebrated. And I think that's really special and important.
And Manami, last words for you.
And I love, Chelsea, what you said about the way that we've gotten to know each other in ways we might not have before the pandemic. And I know I mentioned it earlier when I was referencing our workplace program, but the new flexibility that's come out of working from home and finding what works best for individuals as well as for our work environment has, I think, really helped and gone a long way too in changing the way that we work and impacting our industry. So I think it really empowers employees to work in the way that's best for them and to be able to navigate what they're going through in a way that's, like I said, empowers them and it allows them to put themselves in the driving seat.
Well, I want to thank our panel for some wonderful insights and advice on how to support our employees to ensure that they enjoy mental health and wellness in our workplaces. Thanks for joining us. And for our audience, please stay tuned because TalentEgg is very proud to announce the winner of our new category this year for Best Contribution to Mental Health in the Workplace, along with other important awards at our TalentEgg 2022 Campus Recruitment Excellence Awards, coming up next.